Hello, Petal. Thank you for returning to listen to Chapter 11 of You Don't Have to Be Evil to Work Here, but It Helps. J.W. Wells & Co. Book 4, as we have all unilaterally established, right? So, I do appreciate you coming back every time. I really, really do. It makes it all worthwhile. I love your comments. I really do appreciate them. And especially when you hit the like button for me, hit the notifications bell, share if you want to, subscribe if you want to. It's good to have you on board. Anyway, right, let's do this thing. So, Chapter 11. Cassie Clay picked up the phone, put it to her ear, reached out for the keypad, and hesitated. A promise was a promise. Furthermore, she was a professional. But she did still have a few conscience-coloured stains in the lining of her soul that wouldn't come out, not even with the boil wash. And, more to the point, he'd asked her to, and even though she now had some idea of what was going on, and why she was suffering these stupid symptoms, that didn't stop them having at least some effect. He'd asked, and that was why she was doing it. Even bloody so. She dialed the number. It's extra X directory, and a hideous fate awaits anybody who discloses it without due authorization. But here's a hint. It's 3 digits long, and if you called the fire brigade while standing on your head. 3 rings, then the click, then the voice. This was the bit that Cassie hated.
Thank you for calling the Powers of Darkness. Your call may be recorded for security and training purposes. For general, moral or ethical inquiries, press 1 on your keypad. To make a reservation, press 2. For details of our special discount packages for lawyers, politicians and Microsoft executives, press 3. For the Deep Blue Sea, press 4. To speak to a sales advisor, please hold.
She held. They played country and western at her, thereby nailing once and for all the old lie that the devil has all the best tunes. She waited. They wouldn't be interested, of course. They'd laugh in her face. But just suppose they didn't. Just suppose they were prepared to agree. Was she really prepared to make it possible for them to get their claws on an innocent man in place of a scumbag? If she really did still have vestigial traces of a sense of right and wrong.
Your call is being stored in a queue. Please hold. Your call will be answered shortly, unless, of course, you are already a resident, in which case...
Cassie held the receiver away from her ear, so as not to be deafened by the peals of cackling laughter. The implications of that gave a whole new penumbra of meaning to the phrase, the torments of the damned. The phone sang King of the Road, Ghost Riders in the Sky, and Stand by Your Man. Cassie shuddered, made a resolution to be very, very good from now on, and endured. Inquiries, how can I help you? Rumour had it that they, like so many large concerns, had relocated their call centre. Being who they were, however, they relocated it to Newcastle. Hello, Cassie said. My name's Cassandra Clay. I'm calling from J.W. Wells & Co. in London, England. I was wondering if I could speak to your reference S/BLB/purchases/45115. Please hold. To help pass the time, she mused on the strengths and limitations of Funkhausen's loop. It wasn't easy, resolving the subtle nuances of temporal metaphysics with Jolene thundering through her head like a waterfall. But she considered the final scene of the drama in the tea shop. The point, surely, was that only in that episode did the pins and needles make sense. Putting you through? Cassie snapped out of her reverie and took a deep breath. Hello? Miss Clay? It wasn't the voice she was used to talking to. In itself, that was no bad thing, since the regular voice wasn't a nice thing to have in your ear. This one, by contrast, was female, quite ordinary, rather bored. How can I help you? She cleared her throat. It's about purchase number 45115. she said. I was wondering. Just a moment, I'll get the file. Sure. Please don't turn on the... Either she was too late or it was deliberate. This time it was Roy Orbison. It seemed to take forever for whoever it was to find the file. Right, the female voice said eventually. Purchase number 45115. That'd be Mr. Hollinghead. Yes, I can confirm. That was all signed up earlier today. In fact, the voice added with a faint trace of bewilderment. You witnessed the signatures? That's right, yes. I see. Anyway, it's all done and dusted, and we look forward to receiving your bill in due course. Ah, Cassie's mouth was curiously dry. I was wondering, she said. You see, there's been a, sort of last-minute change of plan. Oh, yes. Deep breath. That's right. My client, Mr. Hollinghead, to cut a long story short, the wrong person signed. What I mean is, the soul you've contracted to buy is the wrong one. Oh, dear. Well, quite. So I was thinking, if we can just quietly put that contract to one side, get another one drawn up with the right name on it, I'll see to all the signing formalities and so forth, free of charge, naturally, and then you can give me back the old contract, the one with the wrong name. And that'll be that, like you said, done and dusted. Silence. For some reason, Cassie found it rather awkward to breathe. Well, said the voice, it's not actually up to me. I'm just the assistant personal assistant. Oh, but I can't imagine there'd be any problem, the voice continued. Mistakes happen, don't they? Relief flooded into Cassie's mind like the Nile. That's right, she said. Yes, they do. Happens to the best of us. We're only human, after all. A long silence followed that remark. Oh, Cassie thought. Yep, that was a bit tactless. Anyway, the voice went on, I'm sure we can sort it all out. Wonderful. There will, of course, have to be a nominal administration fee. Well, indeed, Cassie thought, but never mind. That'll be fine, she said. What? May I ask, did you draw up the original contract? That's right, yes. In that case, the voice went on brightly, in order to cancel the agreement and place it with the amended versions, your life and soul will have to be forfeit to the evil one. Now, I can't promise to get the paperwork out to you tonight, but I can definitely make sure it goes out tomorrow. Hang on, Cassie said. Your life and soul, the voice replied promptly. You'll need to sign our standard form forfeiture agreement, along with the usual disclaimers and stuff, and there'll also be an additional registration fee of $5. My life and soul? Correct, since it was your mistake. Cassie didn't shout very often, but she was good at it. No bloody way, she yelled. I'm sorry? That's not acceptable, Cassie said, as firmly as she could. There's no way I can agree to that. Oh, you're sure? Yes. Please hold. More Roy Orbison, but Cassie hardly noticed. She was too busy shaking. Hello? Are you there? What? Cassie pulled herself together as best she could. Yes, I'm here. I've just had a word with the principal personal assistant, the voice said, and, as a gesture of goodwill, we are prepared to waive the $5 fee, if that's any... Sorry, Cassie said. Oh, nonplussed voice. In that case, I'm afraid I can't see there's a whole lot we can do about it. The current agreement will just have to stand, that's all. Well, Cassie said to herself as she replaced the phone, I tried. I really did give it my best shot. And if it really had been true love, instead of some kind of ditzy transtemporal fuck-up, maybe I might have... Nah, not even for true love. She got up, out of her chair, crossed the room and kicked the filing cabinet. Really quite hard. By no stretch of the imagination could Benny Shumway describe Mr. Dow, the suave, sad chief cashier of the Bank of the Dead, as a friend. That went without saying. But over the years they'd built up between them a bond of mutual understanding and respect that might possibly be mistaken for friendship, rather as a careless rambler might mistake an adder for a grass snake. Accordingly, Benny asked his favour of Mr. Dow, and Mr. Dow was pleased to be able to help. As soon as he was back in his office and the connecting door was safely locked and bolted, Benny lunged for the phone on his desk and called Connie's extension. But there was no reply, suggesting that she wasn't in her room. Soddy, Benny thought, but he wasn't surprised. It was that time in the afternoon when people tended to go walkabout if they didn't have anything desperately urgent to get finished. Connie could therefore be anywhere, in with young Cassie, or dropping in for a chat with Kaz Suslovich, looking something up on the computer or in the library, generally lurking and making herself difficult to find. Which was annoying, because what Mr. Dow had told Benny corroborated what he'd seen in the imp-reflecting mirror, and the implications of that were both fascinating and obscure. On his own turf, Benny knew his stuff. An account that refused to balance, or a manticore nesting in the vaults of the Credit Suisse, he could handle easily enough. But this, he readily admitted, wasn't his sort of thing at all, and he made it a rule not to muck about with complicated, dangerous things that he didn't understand. Immediately, he thought of Judy, his fourth ex-wife, hereditary queen of the Fae, currently confined in perpetual suspension under the glass mountain for trying to obliterate humanity in order to provide Lebensraum for her own vicious, insubstantial people. Judy, of course, knew this sort of stuff backwards and inside out. She'd take one look at it, figure out exactly what was happening, and tell him exactly what to do about it. Judy, however, wasn't available, even by dwarf standards. Benny was as brave as a hatter, but nothing would ever induce him to go snooping around the glass mountain. But he picked up a sheaf of petty cash reconciliations and put them neatly away in the appropriate box file. But, he reflected, there might be another way. After all, he only wanted to talk to her. Ask her a question or two. Pick her brains. It might... Nah. The phone rang. Dennis Tanner, still being tormented by the auditors. Apparently, they now wanted the travel expenses book, the receipted invoices for the 1987 office Christmas party, 20 disposable Bic biros, and a laptop Macintosh. Benny said he'd see to it, and put the phone down, before stapling some pink requisition chit carbons to some yellow designated deposit slips and filing them in the cabinet. There was a whole world of difference, after all, between brave as a hatter and brave as two short blanks. He had more than his fair share of the reckless courage displayed by his ancestors in their relentless wars against the goblins, but he knew better than to pull the electric fire into the bath with him to find out if it worked underwater. The back corridor on the second floor was somewhere he wasn't prepared to go. Not for anybody. Not even for Connie Schwartz-Alberish. He thought about that as he arranged the telegraphic transfer dockets in date order. Not even for Connie. But if for anybody, then yes, probably for her. The difference being, Connie wasn't a wife or a girlfriend, or a potential wife or conquest. Connie was a friend. There had been a time when Benny would have slaughtered dragons to fetch home golden fleeces for Judy, or Trudy, or Tracy, Sadie, Dominique, Jenny, Monica, or Samantha. He'd have stormed heaven for them, and cut a slice out the moon to make a comb for their hair. That wasn't particularly demanding. That was just doing stuff. And Benny had always been a man of action. It had taken him many years and a lot of scars to figure out that doing stuff is only a very small part of the deal, and it's the remainder that's both difficult and scary. Nowadays he lived alone, mostly because he'd realised that none of them, not even Dominique or Annie or Jill the traffic warden, what is it people kept asking him about dwarves and women in uniform, had motivated him sufficiently to make a serious effort at coming to terms with the not doing stuff side of sentient relationships. Things like sitting still, listening. With all of them, it had proved too great an effort, for which even red hair and freckled shoulders were an inadequate inducement. With Connie Schwartz Alberish, on the other hand, inexplicably enough, it was a pleasure. Yes, Benny thought, as he tapped the keypad of his calculator, while the fingertips of his left hand caressed a column of figures. But even so, if it meant visiting the back corridor on the second floor, then, regrettably, Connie was on her own. Which makes two of us, he thought. Which is no good. No dwarf, after all, is an island. Besides, he grinned suddenly, like a savage animal baring its teeth, it'd be fun to see Judy again. He missed her. He missed them all, of course, in the way you still occasionally get an itch in a long-since amputated limb. And anyway, what was the worst that could happen? If he went there and things turned pear-shaped on him, at the very most, he'd be torn apart into his component atoms and suspended forever, agonisingly conscious in a dimensionless void outside time and space, a mere trifle, a nano deal. The back corridor on the second floor was where the consultants had their offices. It's quite common in many professions for retiring partners to be kept on as consultants, coming in 1 or 2 mornings a week to potter around and do a few bits of business, keeping their hands in, looking after a few old and valued clients. It's a good system, providing continuity, keeping in touch with the old-timers' wealth of skill and experience, and giving them something to do with their time. J.W. Wells & Co. had always appreciated this. Their motto was, once a partner, always a partner, and, as far as they were concerned, retirement, disability, senility, and indeed death were trivial obstacles easily overcome with a little ingenuity and a simple, everyday receptacle, such as a bottle, jar, or old-fashioned oil lamp. Down one flight of stairs, therefore, turn left at the landing, and down the back corridor, 7th door along, a little brass plate on the door. The Contessa Judith de Castelbianco, retired. There was no point in knocking, but Benny did so anyway. Judy was always fussy about being taken by surprise. He opened the door. A small room. No chairs. Just a plain, cheap desk on which rested a plain pottery oil lamp. The sort whose design has remained basically unchanged since ancient Egypt. Benny paused on the threshold and frowned. It had never been satisfactorily established which part of a deceased partner remained behind when the rest went to the external reward. It was a matter of academic interest only, so long as the work got done and the bills were sent out on time. All that was known for certain was that the residue trapped in the container was sentient, replete with all the ex-partner's memories and character traits, and held there painfully and against its will. "Hi, Jude," Benny said. He took a step forward, then stopped. There was no denying that Judy could be scary sometimes, most of the time in fact, but he was still convinced that deep down, at some level neither of them had ever been able to explain coherently, he had always been the special one for her. Even the last time, when he turned against her and betrayed her to her unspeakable fate, there'd been a spark of the old magic left. He advanced another step, reached out with the tip of his forefinger, and gently tickled the side of the lamp. Memories of touch are always immediate and vivid, no matter how long it's been. He closed his eyes for a moment. "Judy," he said. The lamp moved, very slightly. For a split second, Benny froze. He couldn't remember what he was meant to do, or what was going to happen next. The only thought in his mind was, "I'm going to see her again." He snapped out of it a quarter of a second before it was too late, but dwarves are blessed with superb reflexes. He jumped backwards with both feet as a jet of pink steam blossomed out of the lamp's spout and hung in the air, like mist, backlit by a street lamp. "Hiya, kid," he said softly. "How's things?" The steam billowed, heaved and convulsed, like an animal caught in a net, curdled and thickened, filled out a head and shoulders, a face as yet without eyes or mouth. The hiss was like snakes, and there was a sour smell of sweat. "Benny," said a voice, very far away. "That you?"
"Judy,"
Benny replied.
"Get me out of here, Benny. Please."
"Sorry, Jude."
The eyes were being moulded. The thin line of the pressed-together eyelids formed, deepened and split. Lashes sprouted as the eyes opened and looked at him. "What do you mean, sorry, you jerk?" Pause, filled with desperation and disappointment. "You're here to rescue me, right?"
"Wrong."
As he said the word, Benny considered it. Come to think of it, now that he was here, why not? Life would be so much more fun with Judy around again. And then he remembered. It was entirely possible for a consultant to leave his office, go back into the outside world, and take on a whole new lease of life, just so long as someone took his place. That was all. Oh, she'd got her colour back. Not that she'd ever had very much of it, but that it never mattered very much. By her very nature as one of the Fae, Judy existed almost entirely in the eye of the beholder. As far as Benny was concerned, she'd always been, quite simply, perfect. But ask him to describe her or draw a picture of her, and he wouldn't have known where to start.
"I see. Fine," she said bitterly. "So, to what do I owe the pleasure?"
Benny pulled a sad face.
"Work," he said. "I need your help with something."
She shimmered a little, like smoke stirred by a breeze, then settled until she was practically solid, sitting in her office chair, her hands on the arms, her head slightly on one side.
"Oh, well," she said, "you realize that you're the first mortal I've seen in 6 months.
He could feel her eyes tugging at his face.
"That long? Too bad. What's it like where you are, anyhow?"
"Horrible,"
Judy said.
"You?"
Benny shrugged.
"Could be better," he said. "You know about the takeover, of course."
For maybe half a second, she went out of focus.
"What do you mean, takeover?"
"Nobody told you?" He was shocked. "Jack and Dennis and Kaz sold the business," he said. "I'm amazed you didn't know. I'd have thought—"
"Sold the business?"
She blurred again, as though someone had splashed water over a movie camera lens.
"What the hell did they want to go and do that for?"
Benny shrugged.
"Well, you know what a complete fuck-up everything was, what with Theo and Ricky getting killed, particularly since it was so soon after Humph and
me."
"That's right. I mean, losing 4 partners out of 7 in under a year. Basically, it was sell up or shut down. In fact, that's what I wanted to talk to you about, in a way."
"The bastards!" Judy hissed.
"Screw it, Benny. How dare they? I'm still a partner in this goddamned firm. What about my share? They can't do that. It's
done," Benny said gently.
"And just in time, too. As it is, we had to close all the overseas offices. Paris, Hollywood, Frisco, Lisbon, Stockholm, Guadeloupe. Half our entertainments and media clients defected to UMG.
That stinking bitch, Betty Capofero," Judy snarled. "Half? Which half?"
"You don't want to know," Benny replied. "It'd only upset you."
"Which sector? Movies or politics?"
"Both,"
Benny said wretchedly, feeling her pain.
"We lost Ashford, Clent, and Maeve Richards.
Fuck.
And Doug Tree and Dermot Fraud, all to UMG. Charlie Wilkinson's gone to Saucer Corp. We only hung on to Alan Titch Swamp by cutting our commission to 3%. It's been pretty rough, I'm telling you."
For a while, Judy was just a swirl of pink cloud, glittering with incandescent sparkles of furious anger.
"I turned my back for 5
fucking minutes, she wailed, and everything I worked for goes straight down the toilet. Who are these clowns, anyhow?
Ah, Benny frowned. That's the question. See, we don't know. They haven't seen fit to tell us. Jack and Dennis and Kaz must know, presumably, but they aren't telling.
How do you mean you don't know? You must have seen them.
Seen them, sure, none the wiser. I thought I knew everybody in the business, but they're complete strangers to me. What makes me think they're outsiders or something?
That's not allowed.
There's ways around it. You know that. But I've been doing some investigating of my own. Oh, by the way, they just fired Connie Schwartz-Alberish.
They did what?
Exactly. Benny nodded. That's why I'm here, basically. We need to find out who they are before we can stop them. But listen up for a moment.
You came here to see me, she said quietly. To help Connie Schwartz-Alberish. I see.
Listen,
Benny repeated, his voice both soothing and urgent.
And I'll tell you what I've got so far.
And he told her about what he'd seen in the fragment of mirror and what Mr. Dow had found out for him from the bank's records. When he finished talking, she was quiet for what felt like a very, very long time, and when she did speak, she said, "Benny, you've got to get me out of here."
"Yes, I know,"
she snapped before he could interrupt. "But this is important. This is for the good of the firm. I can deal with those jerks, but not if I'm stuck in here. And you—"
Pause.
"Well, no offence, but—"
"Nice try," Benny said firmly. "Listen, Jude, if it was—" He took a deep breath. "If it was anybody else but you, maybe I'd do it. But I can't let you out of there. You know that. You'd be back up to your old ways."
"Benny—"
"No. Please don't ask me again, okay?"
He took a step back, then looked over his shoulder.
"Judy," he said.
"What?"
"The door, Judy."
Because at some point, somehow, the door had vanished, just as if the wall had healed up. A room with 4 walls and no door is a very, very, very bad place to be. "What?"
"Go on, then."
The door reappeared. Benny opened it, took off his left shoe, and used it to wedge the door slightly ajar.
"It's not that I don't trust you, Jude."
"Liar."
"All right, but you know I can't—"
"Fine," she sighed, like the wind blowing through the last dead leaves of autumn. "So, let's get this straight. They don't show up in the imp-reflecting mirror, right?"
"Correct."
"And you asked your pal at the bank, and he told you that no reservations have been made in their names?"
"That's right. He checked the register for the next 150 years.
"Then it's obvious, surely." Judy explained it to him, point by point and step by step. "It's so simple," she added afterwards. "I'm amazed you didn't figure it out for yourself. It's the only possible explanation."
"But it doesn't make any sense," Benny objected. "I mean, if you're right, why? Why the hell would anyone bother going to all that trouble?"
"There's a reason," Judy replied, "but you haven't figured it out yet. That's all. Now, if only you'd let me come back, just temporarily, for a week or so." Benny felt something pressing gently on his left instep. It was, he realized, his shoe, the one he'd wedged the door open with.
"Judy," he said, "please put the door back."
"What? Oh, shucks." She grinned, the sort of grin a face wears when all the skin and flesh has rotted away and only bone is left. "Silly me."
"The fucking door, Judy."
"It's only because I want us to be together again," she cooed. "Together forever, right?"
"Not like this, no."
"Then screw you!" Behind him, the door flew open. He heard it bang against the wall. "Get out of here and solve your own goddamn problems. You know what? I don't think you ever did give a damn about me, Benny. Otherwise you wouldn't leave me here, all alone, in this."
"So long, Judy."
Benny said. "Thanks, you've been a great help." He backed away toward the door. He'd almost made it when a bolt of blue lightning flashed at him from the spout of the lamp. It missed, but not by much. He felt the burn on his cheek, cold, not fire. He looked up at Judy, who blew him a kiss before she was sucked back into the lamp. Benny took his time returning to his office. His legs were weak and a little bit shaky. He found it difficult to concentrate on anything, even on where he was going. Partly, he was still recovering from the implications of what Judy had told him. Yes, she was right. It was all perfectly simple when you looked at it logically, but the simple and obviously correct solution just didn't fit. He was also somewhat preoccupied with other issues that had nothing to do with Connie, the takeover, or the identity of the new management. Mostly, it was something that Judy had said. He knew why, of course. It was nothing more than a blind thrust at his centre of guilt, a pretty obvious and feeble attempt at manipulation. It didn't mean anything, and he would be entirely justified in deleting it from his mind. "You came here to see me, to help Connie Schwartz Albrecht." "I see." Strange though, Benny was under no illusions about Judy's motivations or about how close he'd come to taking her place under the glass mountain. Attributing any sort of humanoid feeling to Judy was a bit like trying to psychoanalyse a bomb. Jealousy, therefore. It wasn't Judy's feelings he should be concerned about, of course. He was just outside the boardroom door. He stopped and listened. There were no voices coming from inside, so the room was empty. He shrugged, opened the door and went in. The JWW boardroom was meant to be imposing and intimidating. It had never had that effect on Benny. If anything, he found it vaguely restful, perhaps because it reminded him of home. If it hadn't been for the windows, it could almost have been a room in the house where he'd grown up. That house was long gone, of course, looted, trashed, undermined and filled in by goblins over a century ago in one of the last raids, before the peace settlement of 1899. No great loss. By dwarf standards, it was a slum, an end of gallery 2 up, 97 down. He'd left home when he'd been a mere boy of 80. Hadn't been back since. Never regretted it. Nevertheless, the boardroom's dark panelling and massive furnishings always helped him settle his mind. He thought well here. He sat down at the great mirror-polished table, leaned back in his chair, and applied his mind. So simple. The imp-reflecting mirror had shown nothing, and there were no reservations in the new management team's names in the land of the dead. Therefore, they did not exist. Whatever it was he'd spent half an hour with that morning, it wasn't a living being. It wasn't real. There could be all sorts of reasons for that. It could simply be a tax thing, or an elaborate mechanism for circumventing corporate law. The technology wasn't all that complex, though it was pretty long-winded. Someone had been to a certain amount of trouble and expense to create the illusions of the annoying little man and his colleagues. Pause. Who could do that sort of stuff? A piece of cake for the fair, all of whom were natural, effective magicians. They could create illusions and glamours and phantoms and incubi just by thinking. But ever since Judy's overthrow, the Fae was safely locked up in their own shallow, tormented dimension, unable to interact or interfere with anything on the other side of the line. Among humans, pretty well any accomplished, effective magician could have done the engineering, and Benny could have filled 2 sides of A4 with the names of likely suspects without having to pause for thought. The question, though, was why? It only mattered, Benny told himself, because whoever was behind it all had seen fit to sack Connie Schwartz Albrecht, and of course that wasn't on. Furthermore, why would anybody want to? She earned the firm more money per fiscal quarter than Kaz Suslowicz or Peter Melsnick. She was efficient, reliable, highly respected in the trade, an asset and a credit to the firm. If they were getting rid of her, therefore, there had to be a very good reason, or a very bad one. Who was it who said, "Never attribute to malice anything that can be explained by incompetence"? Benny couldn't recall offhand, but unreal or not, the new management were still management, and the M word is, after all, just Latin for couldn't find their arse with both hands. Management tends to do stuff like that, as part of its contribution to keeping the world imperfect and chaotic. Even so. In which case, he was forced back on the conclusion he'd already jumped to, the moment Connie had told him the news. They were getting rid of her because she'd found out something that they didn't want anybody to know, or she was inadvertently doing something that got in the way of their secret agenda. Benny groaned aloud. He didn't like conspiracy theories. For one thing, they implied that there's an efficient and competent providence shaping the course of events, even if it's a malign one, and Benny preferred to believe, reasonably enough in his opinion, that nobody, good guys or bad guys, is capable of being that organised. Far more likely that stuff, good or bad, simply happens how and when it wants to, and the most anyone can do is be shrewd enough to take advantage, surfing on the crest of the tidal wave. Even so. But Connie wasn't like that. She didn't snoop, spy, insert her nose unless she was compelled to do so by a very, very, very good reason. The only things outside the work in her in tray with which she'd concerned herself recently had been the identity of the new management, and Benny knew she'd be no further forward than him or anybody else at the time of her dismissal, and this stupid business with young Cassie and the guy from Hollingshead's. Unless... The vague outlines of an idea were starting to form in Benny's mind. No more than shapes, structures, an aerial photograph of an idea taken from so high up you could barely recognise it for what it was. Something to do with He frowned, then scowled. Something to do. Quickly, decisively, he looked down. There, in the polished tabletop, he saw his reflection, and, since he was no more nor less than he claimed to be, the imp-reflecting surface showed him exactly the same image as he'd have seen in any ordinary mirror. But he concentrated, screwing up his eyes behind the massively thick lenses of his glasses. He was zooming in on the pupils of the reflection's eyes, trying to see if there was anything odd about them. He saw what he was looking for, and he turned his head away. All dwarfs have brown eyes. It's DNA, or something equally technical. Benny was no exception. Indeed, he owed 2 of his marriages to the apparent soulfulness of his eyes, though that had been a blessing so mixed as to be practically scrambled. The eyes of the reflection, however, were grey. "Judy," he said, quiet but clear. A sharp twinge, the sort you get from eating ice cream or biting on a bit of silver foil. He looked down again. The brown eyes were back. Unfortunately, the idea, or the schematic for the idea, was completely gone. Well, Benny thought, can't blame her for trying. And Judy might have her faults, but nobody could deny she was as sharp as a tack. At any rate, if she had solved the problem, then it meant that the problem was soluble. It was a pity he was going to have to figure it out on his own, slowly and laboriously, instead of taking advantage of Judy's superior insight and intellectual voltage. A pity, but the price was too high. Well, at any rate, she'd set him on the right path. Benny glanced at his watch. His chat with his ex had taken longer than he'd anticipated, and he had work to do. He should be getting back, finishing up the daily chores. If there was time, he'd drop by Connie's office and fill her in on what he'd found out. After all, she was much better at intuitive leaping than he was. Maybe she'd solve it in a flash, like Judy had done. He yawned as he pushed open his office door. These days, mortal peril took it out of him more than it used to. Maybe he should start thinking about retiring while he's still... He stopped dead on the threshold and stared. The unthinkable was, reasonably enough, something that Benny didn't think about much. In the early hours of the morning, when more self-unalivings happen and worriers lie awake staring at the ceiling, Benny slept. Solid, dreamless, dwarf sleep, untroubled by anything. So he'd never scared himself after death with wondering how he'd react if he ever wandered into his office and found the connecting door to the land of the dead unlocked, unbolted and wide open, which, in context, was a pity. Short-sighted even. Oh my. Well, that's getting a bit exciting, isn't it? So Judy's poked her head out from nowhere. The door to the land of the dead's open. Cliffhanger, I'm sorry. But I will have another episode for you in a couple of days. So as usual, I know I whiffle on about this and I'm really, really sorry. But it really, really, really does help me if you just give a little bing, bing, like on the like button or on the notifications bell or share and subscribe. It does help me out because I can just see it. And I'm sorry for repeating myself, but it really does let me know it's worthwhile. And of course, leave a comment, have a chat. Stop in for a cup of tea. Have a little bit of a banter. You know how it goes. Anyway, I'll stop waffling on now because I'm going to go and crack on with my Substack now. Woo! Big kisses, petals, and I'll see you in a couple of days. Thank you so much for listening. Take care of yourselves.